Zinc, aluminium, copper, silver, iron ore, oil and gas are the building blocks of the modern world. Without them, life as we know it would be impossible. With a footprint spanning 4 continents, Vedanta is one of the largest producers of natural resources in the world. Copper is where it all began for Vedanta. Today, Vedanta is a leading global player in copper. With its multiple present-day uses, copper plays a critical role in contemporary life. Aluminium has been called a perfect material, touching our lives in the most fundamental ways. Vedanta is India's largest producer of this most versatile of metals, aluminium. Silver is a key element in digital connectivity. 95% of India's primary silver is produced by Vedanta. One of metal's unsung heroes is zinc. Zinc protects and extends the life of steel. Vedanta is one of the world's leading integrated producers of zinc and lead. Oil fuels the drive behind modern economies and lifestyles. Vedanta Can Oil and Gas is one of India's leading independent energy majors. As India's largest iron ore producer, Vedanta has set a precedent in environmental concern, transforming a used mine site into a beautiful horticultural park.
We at Vedanta are fully committed to explore and to develop these resources in most sustainable manner. This will be a game changer for the economy and will create millions of jobs and eradicate poverty. I'm committed to build a culture, not only the company, the culture built on trust, working together in harmony for the greater good. For me, business is not about accumulating wealth. It's all about giving back to the society.
Power, responsibility. Our future depends on the balance. We're Cummins, and our balance of power and responsibility is behind some of the world's largest green hydrogen production plants and the first ever emission-free hydrogen fuel cell passenger train. It's also putting kids on zero-emission school buses every morning. Whether we're powering data centers, helping to build greener homes, plowing fields, leaving a zero carbon footprint, or being the heartbeat of a hospital. We're investing $906 million a year to pioneer the most responsible, innovative, and sustainable power solutions we can. Because now, more than ever, we need to do the right thing. And we need to do it together. Cummins, always responsible. For a world that's always on.
Zinc, aluminium, copper, silver, iron ore, oil and gas are the building blocks of the modern world. Without them, life as we know it would be impossible. With a footprint spanning 4 continents, Vedanta is one of the largest producers of natural resources in the world. Copper is where it all began for Vedanta. Today, Vedanta is a leading global player in copper. With its multiple present-day uses, copper plays a critical role in contemporary life. Aluminium has been called a perfect material, touching our lives in the most fundamental ways. Vedanta is India's largest producer of this most versatile of metals, aluminium. Silver is a key element in digital connectivity. 95% of India's primary silver is produced by Vedanta. One of metal's unsung heroes is zinc. Zinc protects and extends the life of steel. Vedanta is one of the world's leading integrated producers of zinc and lead. Oil fuels the drive behind modern economies and lifestyles. Vedanta Can Oil and Gas is one of India's leading independent energy majors. As India's largest iron ore producer, Vedanta has set a precedent in environmental concern, transforming a used mine site into a beautiful horticultural park.
We at Vedanta are fully committed to explore and to develop these resources in the most sustainable manner. This will be a game changer for the economy and will create millions of jobs and eradicate poverty. I'm committed to build a culture, not only the company, the culture built on trust, working together in harmony for the greater good. For me, business is not about accumulating wealth. It's all about giving back to the society.
Power. Responsibility. Our future depends on the balance.
Good morning, Mr. Kalyani.
The balance of power and responsibility is behind some of the world's largest green hydrogen production plants and the first ever emission-free hydrogen fuel cell passenger train.
You want
It's
to
also
talk to me?
kids on zero-emission school buses every morning.
So, Amita, what am I supposed to say in this inaugural stuff? Can't hear you.
So it will be a very brief conversation between you and Mr. Kirloskar. He will ask you to give your vision going forward for manufacturing. I think much of what you said yesterday is very, very relevant. And then a little bit of a Q&A between the two of you. The two industry stalwarts setting the tone for the manufacturing.
And
country of
it'll be about 15 minutes, right?
We've put in 20, but 15 is good. 15 to 20, whatever spills over.
So why having these duplicate sessions, manufacturing, this one and the DPIIT one? What is going on?
This one, Mr. Kalyani, is something we've prepared for over 2 months now with a lot of foreign speakers. And this was like our thing on really because a lot of boost was given to manufacturing the past 6 months. So
Yeah.
we wanted to do it along with a lot of global participation. And the ministry one really is like something that just popped up in 2 days, 3 days back. You know, so this was a long...
That is being presented to the Prime Minister.
Yes, of course. Now, that is actually, Mr. Kalyani, they are doing, you may have noticed, with all the ministries, prime ministers doing post-budget sessions. So he's doing today with, in fact, agriculture ministry. Yesterday he did with the rural development. So what is the boost that came in from the budget for manufacturing is one of the big agendas, which is doing with almost all the ministries.
But on the just on the DPIIT thing, you're going to give me some inputs, what we have to include apart from what I said yesterday?
Certainly, I will do that, Mr. Kalyani.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, most welcome.
Zinc, aluminium, copper, silver, iron ore, oil and gas are the building blocks of the modern world. Without them, life as we know it would be impossible. With a footprint spanning 4 continents, Vedanta is one of the largest producers of natural resources in the world. Copper is where it all began for Vedanta. Today, Vedanta is a leading global player in copper. With its multiple present-day uses, copper plays a critical role in contemporary life. Aluminium has been called a perfect material, touching our lives in the most fundamental ways. Vedanta is India's largest producer of this most versatile of metals, aluminium. Silver is a key element in digital connectivity. 95% of India's primary silver is produced by Vedanta. One of metal's unsung heroes is zinc. Zinc protects and extends the life of steel. Vedanta is one of the world's leading integrated producers of zinc and lead. Oil fuels the drive behind modern economies and lifestyles. Vedanta Can Oil and Gas is one of India's leading independent energy majors.
Morning, Chairman. Morning, Mr. Kalyani. Chairman, is the voice coming across clearly to you?
Very clear. Is my voice okay?
Yes.
How about the 800 people who have registered?
Yes, we just have to keep our fingers crossed as to how many people are actually logging on.
You are not able to hear them.
Good morning, Mr. Parab.
Yeah, good morning.
Yeah. So, Chairman, we have the speakers of the next session also who would join in here, and then, for you to hand over. We'll begin sharp at 10, another 5 minutes to go. Thank you.
No problem. Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Anil Parab.
Yeah, good morning, Mr. Satish. Good morning, good morning.
Hi Vikram, hi Mr. Kalyani.
Hi, good morning.
Morning, Mr. Nikhil.
Hi Anil, hi Mr. Parab.
Good morning, Mr. Nikhil.
Amita. Are we live right now?
Yeah, live now.
Hi, Bitan. Good morning. Bitan is from BCG.
Good morning, Satish. How are you? We'll have Martin join in very quickly. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Vikram. Good morning, Mr. Kalyani.
Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Good morning, Mr. Martin Reeves.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, your voice is coming across clearly. Thank you.
If the organizer's there, I wondered if I could ask if we have time to test the projection of the slides. Oh, I see we're live now. Okay, let's hope it works.
With your permission, I'd like to start. It's 10 o'clock. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this edition of the CII Manufacturing Conclave, held today on 24th February 2022. The conclave has a theme of Can India become the global leader in the manufacturing sector in this decade? This is the opening plenary session, which is having the theme of setting the tone. And we have two industry stalwarts, Mr. Vikram Kirloskar, who is currently the chairman of CII Manufacturing Council and also the vice chairman of Toyota Kirloskar Motor. And we have Mr. Baba Kalyani, who is also the immediate past chairman of the CII Manufacturing Council and the chairman and managing director of Bharat Forge. We also have other panelists and other participants who have joined. Welcome all of you today. With these few words, I would like to hand it over to Mr. Kirloskar to conduct the proceeding. Thank you. Over to you, Chairman Mr. Kirloskar.
Thank you. Good morning and a warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today. We have a very large number of registrations, over 800, and I hope most of them will join us through the various...
Vikram, you're not audible. You need to increase your volume.
Is it okay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
All right. Good morning, a warm welcome to all of you. We've had almost 800 registrations for this seminar, and we already have 321 live on for this session. The last 2 years with COVID have been very challenging. All of us know we don't need to talk about it. We've had disruptions in supply chains. We've had containers all over the world, but stuck all over the world, and movement in goods have become difficult. In the auto industry, we faced a chip shortage. I think there have been issues all over the world, and we have learned to cope up with them as we go along. In the last 2 years also, the government has recognized the importance of manufacturing and started this wonderful PLI scheme, which people are applying for, which we hope will take manufacturing into a new high in the next decade and in the coming years. We have today with us Mr. Baba Kalyani. I've worked with Baba for the last, I think, almost 40 years since I came back from college. I learned a lot from him. I think he's the most, for me, one of the most revered sort of manufacturing person I have ever known. A person with huge vision and a person who has made it happen. He's also a recipient of the Padma Bhushan. He's been on many committees. He's well known all over the world. Baba, over the years that I worked with you, there are a couple of things. There are a lot of things I learned from you. But I think there are two things I'd like to just sort of talk of, which I remember during my first meetings with you. First was when you had put in this huge new automatic line for crankshafts in Bharat Forge. I think it was really taking the biggest risk that Bharat Forge probably had ever taken. The first, I think that come from somewhere in Eastern Europe, and you had got the electricals from Germany, and it's completely automated with a huge, huge volume. At that time you said, Bharat Forge is going to grow on a technology base, and that's how we are going to be competitive. And I remember that till today. And when I'm doing things today, that's always the thought behind my mind. So one of the questions would be, and I would request you to address in this coming decade, which are the sort of big important points, important strategies Indian manufacturing should look at for the kind of growth that we've seen with Bharat Forge over the last 20, 30, 40 years. And the second thing also, which I remember, and I still, it's a big point for me when I'm doing my strategy. You said I look at which are the key knowledge items Bharat Forge, which are the key knowledge items that Bharat Forge needs to grow. And I ensure that I have people in those knowledge items all the time, and their skill is continuously improving, and their knowledge is improving. And you listed 5 or 6 or 10 items of particular technical knowledge and various other items. I said this is very key to Bharat Forge. How do I ensure people will have those skills and keep enhancing those skills as we go along? These two things have been with me for the last 35, 40 years. I remember them, and I literally follow them. What would your advice be for our audience for the next 10 years? What are the skills and knowledge we require in manufacturing that we must enhance to be successful in the world? Over to you, Baba. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Vikram. Thanks for the compliments. Not necessary. For everybody's benefit, I've known Vikram more as a young family guy. The Kirloskar family and the Kalyani family have had relations for almost last 4 generations. So it's been a very different relationship, but thanks, Vikram, anyway. Coming to manufacturing, I think world over manufacturing is going to go through some major challenges as well as opportunities. And if we look at India, and if we look at the larger part of where we are located geographically, this is Asia. I think Asia is going to lead not only manufacturing, but economic growth on this planet. As it is in 2020, Asia's GDP has already crossed the rest of the world. And I think going forward by 2030, I believe India will become the third largest country in terms of GDP. So you're looking at some very exciting periods of growth. The challenges that we are going to face, all of us, are a couple. Number one, the biggest challenge is this massive change that is taking place on the technology front. Whether it is digital technology getting in, whether it is IoT, whether it is artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the things that come out of it. And I'll tell you what the challenge is. The challenge is not understanding this technology and implementing this technology. The challenge is that your structure, and structure by structure I would mean your labor regulations, your industrial regulations, are designed for the analog Stone Age. And now you're going to enter the digital age. And they just don't apply together. And unless and until you change that, because if you have guys working on your manufacturing shop floor who don't understand digital technology, I think you're not going to be able to take advantage of the benefits of digital technology. So we have a big mismatch in terms of rules, regulations. You want to call it ease of doing business or otherwise. I'm going to mention this in my report to the Prime Minister, which I have to make on the 3rd of March. But this is one big area. The second big area in manufacturing is everything in manufacturing, no matter what you make, is going to have some amount of electronics or electronic systems which are going to be in it or around it. And therefore, knowledge of electronics, knowledge of embedded systems, knowledge of embedded software is going to be an absolute must if you want to survive going forward. On a larger scale for India, to really grow in manufacturing, India needs to grow its electronic industry. Without the electronic industry, without a semiconductor industry, you simply will not. You will remain a underdeveloped country for the next 20 years. So, but the government is doing a lot of work in that area. You mentioned about PLI schemes. Yeah, there are special schemes for electronics. You know that there is a special scheme for semiconductors. So all this is there. The question is, do we have what it takes to execute and make it happen in the next 10 years? If I look at the last 2 years, when the pandemic started, although you didn't want to talk about the pandemic, but I think it's an important lesson. When the pandemic started in March of 2020, first time we heard COVID-19, and then March 23rd, we had this nationwide lockdown for about 3 months. And we were all worried, we were all scared, we didn't know what would happen. But the amazing thing is that a country that didn't even produce personal protection kits, masks, forget the sophisticated things like ventilators and all that, didn't produce enough oxygen, didn't produce enough oxygen plants, didn't have its own vaccines. In less than 1 year, we were exporting all these things. And we have become the largest vaccine producer in the world. I mean, we have created the best medical ecosystem for our country in terms of whether it's ICU beds, whether it's medical beds. Even America doesn't have it. Even Europe doesn't have it. Okay? So I think we are way ahead. When we want to make things happen, we can be way ahead of everybody else. We just need to break the silos. We just need to make sure everybody gets together and we work in a mission mode. And that's what you need to do in manufacturing. You have to work in a mission mode. You have to break the silos. You have to make the various departments of the government understand that what are going to be the let's say the road bumps or the road blocks if you don't change rules, regulations as far as manufacturing is concerned. So this is one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is this whole issue connected with climate change. Now, climate change has become a serious matter. And I don't think anybody in any part of the world can afford to neglect the whole issue of getting or having a roadmap to net zero, a roadmap for getting, let's say, to zero CO2 type of situation. And we have in our country a lot of old industry, our manufacturing industry. I would say 80% of that is old industry, whether it's MSME or whether it's the medium scale. Yes, there are some modern plants which are pretty good, which are probably even better than what you will find elsewhere in the world, but they are far and few. And therefore, there is a big challenge for us to get our old industry into a shape where they can, let's say, pass the barrier of sustainability in terms of CO2, in terms of liquid discharge, solid discharge, all the goals that the ESG system has put in terms of climate change. And this is going to be a pretty big change that we have to make in the way we manufacture things. On the flip side of it is that hopefully by 2030, we will become the largest exporter of renewable energy on this planet. Please understand, we didn't do well in the first industrial revolution. I think the first industrial revolution started in England with the steam engine. And then we didn't do very well. We were kind of bypassed on that. We didn't do well in the second one either. The electronics industrial revolution just bypassed us because our bureaucrats, rules, regulations simply didn't allow us to get attached to it. But now is an opportunity with climate change and everything else where you can just turn the tables. India has a very low level of industrialization per capita, as a percentage of GDP, we are at some 15% or something like that. And our GDP is about, let's say, $3 trillion. And 2030, 2032, we're looking at the GDP going to 10 trillion, at least. And then you're looking at manufacturing going to about 25%. So you're looking at something like 2.5 trillion in manufacturing. And compared to today, that's about 5 times of what it is going to be. So you have going to have tremendous headwind in terms of the manufacturing scale, provided you are able to do the kind of things that I just talked about. You're able to produce in a sustainable manner. You're able to get your carbon footprint down. You're able to have your internal strategies to move in that direction. So this is how I see. The last point, Vikram, I'd like to touch is the biggest problem India will have going forward, whether not only in manufacturing, almost in every field, is talent. We are going to be very, very short of talent. And although we have had skill development programs from the government, there's a Ministry for Skill Development working for the last, I would say, almost 7, 8, 10 years. Honestly, the focus of skill development on ITI and then saying we want to use machine learning and digital and artificial intelligence, this just doesn't match. So I think that's an area which is going to require very, very special attention. My own suggestion would be to the government, which I'm going to make, is we need to bring back 10, 20,000 Indians who are working in the manufacturing sector in the Western world back here and use their knowledge, use their capabilities, use their, collective system to really take India forward to the next level in terms of technology. So these are the few thoughts that I have. I'm personally very optimistic that we will make it. I'm very optimistic that when we meet here 10 years later, we will see a different India. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Baba. That was highly motivating and I think like a vision statement for manufacturing. It gives a lot of hope that, yes, we can do it provided you get into mission mode, as you said, provided we understand digital, we get out of the analog and get into the digital, we look at green sustainability and just take on the challenge of training our people, getting the knowledge base up to get ahead in this. One just quick story on digital. I was being shown a factory a few months back where they said we have done everything on IoT, everything is connected, and we see all the pictures on the TVs and what all is happening. So I said, but how have you changed your response method based on this digital data that you're getting so fast? And they have not really changed the response method. It was when they did it in an analog fashion and made the graphs and then said, okay, I'll take an action at this point, that point. It was only getting little bit faster. I said, if you're going digital, you have to think digitally too and differentiate your data, integrate your data. What is the feedback loop? How can you increase the gain, not 5 times, but 100 times to get a faster response and technology decision? I think this is the problem with, and I agree with you, converting from analog to digital is just not putting everything on digital. It's a mind change. And there's a science and math behind it, which at times I feel lacking. So I feel also going forward on the knowledge base, science is very, very important. Engineering converts science to technology, and science doesn't change. And I think even in education in India, whether we go for sustainable, digital, etc., our base science skills have to be increased, enhanced, and used. We can't ignore them. Thank you very much again for this terrific motivational speech. I look forward for the whole conference, the whole day. I think we have some very interesting speakers. We're going to focus a lot on MSMEs also this time. I think one of our sessions is we're going to talk a lot of MSMEs. It's very important for the growth of India. Thank you again very much. I'd like to end this session. Thanks.
Thanks, Vikram. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Aman, can we move to the next session? Maybe you can invite the panelists and the chair to take over and conduct the session. Thank you. Chairman, you are muted.
Nikhil, welcome to the today's seminar, and good morning to all the people all the participants at the next session. Nikhil is the chairman of our next session. May I request Nikhil to go ahead?
Thanks so much, Vikram. Very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's always very difficult to follow Mr. Kalyani and Vikram, of course, who are both such stalwarts in our manufacturing sector and industrialists. The current session is on building business resilience, and we have a jam-packed session with members joining us from all around the world. And so we're very pleased to have people joining us at different time zones, and thank you very much for waking up early to do that. But on this topic of business resilience, it has come to the forefront given the issues that we face with COVID, and it stretches from every aspect of the value chain of the industrial manufacturing cycle, from customer acquisition to fulfillment to every aspect in between on supply chain. And we aim to delve into some of these experiences that our panelists have had over the course of COVID, but also in terms of what their views are in terms of building the capabilities to address matters of resilience in the future. We have Mr. Martin Reeves from Boston Consulting Group joining us today, who would give us an insight from a global expert perspective on this subject. We would then open the conversation up with Mr. Deepak Jain, who's the Chairman and Managing Director of Lumax Industries, as well as with Mr. D. Shivakumar, who's a Group Executive President of Corporate Strategy at Aditya Birla Group, as well as with Mr. Anil V. Parab, who's a member of L&T's Executive Committee and Head Heavy Engineering Business at Larsen & Toubro, as well as with Professor Chris White, who's the Director of Policy Industrial Foresight, the Manufacturing Technology Center at the United Kingdom. And lastly, of course, we have Mr. Amrit Acharya, who's a co-founder and chief executive officer of Zetwork. Ladies and gentlemen, this topic of resilience has many different aspects for us to cover during this session. But in my personal opinion of having run a capital goods industry through the course of this pandemic, there were certain learnings that we came across. And I aim to share some of those with you because it may provide an insight as to how different companies have dealt with the issue of resilience at different aspects of time, and how we aim to build the capacity and capability to address this in a more systematic manner going forward. For us, nearly 50% of our orders come from the export market. And as we look at those export markets from a perspective of just getting orders, we have to move extremely quickly onto a digital platform to be able to converse with our customers and to provide them confidence in terms of our capacity and capability to execute. Not only that, we had to fulfill certain orders to attain our longer term vision of customer delight. And so how we were able to commission turbines on a remote basis through tools such as through tools such as augmented reality and other digital tools has really been a testimony to the dynamism of the Indian industrial manufacturing landscape, to be able to move quickly, adapt new systems, and to ultimately ensure that the customer was not inconvenienced. But there's also a different aspect of resilience, which I think is the compassion by which this whole process of COVID has taken place. I believe the initial part of COVID started off with companies trying to reduce their costs and become a little bit more tighter around the belt. But over the period of this last 2 years, I've found not only us, but a number of my colleagues at CII being much more compassionate with their supply chain base, to be able to deal more constructively and proactively with the problems that a variety of different stakeholders have felt, be it in terms of credit, as well as other aspects. And equally, customers have been very forgiving. The whole aspect of legality, legally speaking, in terms of force majeure is still out there. And I hope it doesn't lead to a slew of litigations down the road. But having said that, let us get straight into this conversation. And first, I'd like to invite Mr. Martin Reeves, who I believe has a presentation. Over to you, Martin.
Nikhil, let me see if I can pull my slides up. Okay, so hopefully you can see my slides. Can you see my slides?
It's minimized to the side. Maybe if you could maximize it, it would be better. Yes.
Is that better?
Yes, that's perfect. You have
okay. So it's a great privilege to address this august set of experts and people from the most vibrant economic region in the world on a huge topic, resilience. So I wanted to briefly share a few thoughts on the topic. And let me state my lessons up front, because my aim is to provoke, but we don't have time to do a comprehensive treatment. So I think resilience is a word which is on all of our lips, because of course, COVID has been a massive test of our systems, not just our manufacturing systems and our business systems and our business ecosystems, but our economies, society, international cooperation, regulation. All systems have been tested, and there's a lot to learn. And I think my lessons are that resilience is probably even more important than we think. And in particular, resilience is not just about crises. I'll show you some evidence of that. It actually has a long-term impact. Secondly, it's not just about operations. It is about operations, but it's also about competitive advantage. Thirdly, it's actually more about opportunity than the avoidance of downside. One needs an opportunity mindset. Fourthly, that it's multiple time scales that we need to consider. Resilience requires considering things on at least 4 time scales that I'll talk about. Fifthly, we may like to think that resilience is a property of companies, but actually it's a property of systems of companies. If you think you're resilient, but your suppliers are not, then you're not resilient. It's a system property. Fifthly, that there's a trade-off with efficiency that we need to think very seriously about, which isn't captured in the way that we financially and managerially measure businesses. And so I think these are some very important learnings, and why to reach the futures that Mr. Kalyani was talking about, we'll need to think about resilience in addition to efficiency and innovation and the other topics he mentioned. So how do we define resilience? I define resilience as the capacity to anticipate shock, absorb impact, adapt to change, and reimagine the business under altered circumstances. So I think you can see that this involves foresight, it involves agility, It involves buffering, it involves change and flexibility and adaptation, but also it involves imagination and creativity in the long term, because the ultimate form of resilience is to be able to shape, not to become a victim of the change in our environments. So we've looked at 100 years of crises, and we find that the lessons I listed up front apply to almost all of them. And I think we can already see actually that these lessons also apply to COVID. So the game is not quite finished yet, and there may be some further changes. But one interesting thing we see is that as the Formula One racing driver Ayrton Senna said, he said that you can't overtake 15 cars on a sunny day, but you can on a rainy day. So actually, the best time to reinforce competitive advantage, paradoxically, is actually during times of adversity, because the competitive spread increases. So if you look at the chart on the left, you'll see that this is also true of COVID. The pre-shock competitive spread between the top and the bottom quartile of companies increased dramatically. And interestingly, it increased dramatically mostly on the upside. So when we encounter a crisis, when we encounter adversity, we think about protection from loss, and that's important. But actually, the biggest competitive differences are actually in the upside, which is capitalizing on new growth opportunities because of changes in the pattern of demand. Now, it could be that this is just exaggerating the existing pattern of winners and losers, but the chart in the middle shows that this is not the case. Actually, new winners are born in times of crisis, and the names on the right are not important, but in every industry and in every country we've looked at, there's a new breed of winners that emerges from every crisis. So we conclude that it's strategic, and it's as much about opportunity as is about downside loss, and also resilience applies to businesses and not just the operations within businesses. So concretely, how do we manage resilience? I think a useful way of thinking about it, the most resilient systems that we have are actually the biological systems of our own bodies and the systems in nature that are constantly adapting to changing conditions. So in addition to a large numerical study of resilience and its value in business, we also looked at with an eminent biologist at Princeton University, and the attributes of systems, human systems, economic systems, and biological systems that confer resilience. And it really comes down to 6 things. One of them is prudence. Prudence is preparing for the risk that in 1 year has a low chance of happening, but in 100 years has a certainty of happening. So preparation, we can't always forecast, but we can prepare. And the important point about preparation is not just intellectual preparation, which is scenario planning, but behavioral preparation, which is wargaming and behavioral simulation. And the second one is diversity. So companies with one product in their portfolio, with one business model, with one supplier, may be incredibly efficient, but also, of course, very brittle. So diversity, cognitive diversity, portfolio diversity, all forms of diversity confer resilience. Interestingly, sometimes at the expense of efficiency. So resilience isn't always the CFO's friend, but in the long run, it's necessary. Thirdly, redundancy. Redundancy sounds like inefficiency, but inefficiency in this sense is actually beneficial in the long run. Excess buffering capacity in terms of cash, in terms of manufacturing capacity, in terms of suppliers, and so on. Modularity, internal firewalls. If one factory comes down, if one supply goes down, the whole forest doesn't burn down. I think that's quite important. Interestingly, if you look at the crisis that almost led to the collapse of and the bailout of AIG, the major global insurance company, one of the major contributory factors there was linkages between the subsidiaries that meant that they really didn't have firewalls to stop the damage in one part of the business spreading to the other businesses. Adaptiveness, of course, the ability to adjust to change, which is mostly unforeseeable, and in particular, the ultimate form of adaptiveness, which is shaping, which is actually adapting the environment, shaping the environment, creating novelty so that you are the disruptor rather than the disrupted. And then in the long run, social risks are quite important, social embeddedness. I'm sure that many of you that work in manufacturing are aware of the famous supply chain stories of the fire at the Philips semiconductor factory in 2000 that affected two users of semiconductors, Nokia and Ericsson, very, very differently, mainly because of their ability to collaborate, to form a collaborative system. One of the big customers, Nokia at the time, came out much better off than Ericsson. Their profits increased the following quarter, whereas Ericsson's dramatically increased. And this was the resilience of relationships, if you like. Probably the most stunning example of resilience I can find is the Aishin Seiki fire of February the 1st, 1997, where a factory which was the only source for P-valves for brake fluid distribution for cars was burnt to the ground in a night. And so Toyota production of cars ground to a halt. And unbelievably, within 5 days, everything was up and running again. You know, how is this possible? This is possible because they collaborated with their other suppliers to repurpose their capacity in a massive collaborative effort for which they were paid handsomely afterwards. In other words, very collaborative, resilient, what we might call in modern parlance, ecosystem relationships were responsible for this. And lastly, I want to point to the role of leadership in this. Many of the things I've talked about actually have a cultural underpinning, which is important in addition to the sort of more physical elements. And of course, that's heavily influenced by leadership. So the first one is to reach beyond mitigation and exploit crises as opportunities. And every crisis starts off as a problem, a challenge, but you can see if you do semantic analysis, you can see that some companies embrace the idea that this is also an opportunity for them much sooner than others. So that opportunity mindset, I think, is a critical one. Secondly, looking on multiple time scales, think about creativity, imagination, and the creation of new opportunities and industries. A crisis unfreezes the status quo. We saw this in COVID. It actually accelerates long-term change. And so we have to be ready for that and look at this on all time scales. It's not just a short-term event. 2/3 of long-term outperformers outperform during crises. Crises are not just about the period of crisis. Thirdly, think biologically. You don't think about efficiency only. Short-run efficiency trades off against flexibility, adaptability, creativity, and social embeddedness. Think about the latter because they're associated with long-term performance. Adopt a systems perspective. Don't be a silo and say, I'm adaptive, I don't care about my suppliers. Look at the whole system. And seek balance, not maximization. This trade-off between efficiency and resilience. Think about balance. Avoid the baseline fallacy. The baseline fallacy says that essentially the safest bet is always the current business model, which is of course true until it's not true. By that time, of course, it may be too late to do anything about it. So make space for reimagination along the way. We think about resilience perhaps as a very clinical, operational matter, but in the long run, it's about creativity and differential growth. Most of the difference between long-term successful companies and unsuccessful companies doesn't come from efficiency, as differential efficiency. It comes from differential growth and creativity. And lastly, I've just written a book about this called The Imagination Machine. If you think about it, companies have changed the world more than any politician, poet, or revolutionary because they're in the business of taking ideas and turning them into realities. In the short term, we may tend to forget that. So what's imagination all about? It's actually all about the pursuit of surprise. As humans, the neuroscience says that the reason why we reimagine something is that we encounter an anomaly and we change our mental model. And a crisis is an opportunity, not a guaranteed opportunity, but it's an opportunity to look out the window and see what has really fundamentally changed, and to reimagine a business model. I think we're going to distribute the deck I'm using today that goes deeper into the things I've talked about. In particular, two books that came out this year: The Imagination Machine, and also the book on the Resilient Enterprise. But let me, in the interest of time, let me stop there. Back to you, Nikhil.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank you for offering this deck. If panelists could reach out to the Secretariat, I think they could arrange to have this sent to you. As we look to get this presentation off the screen, I'd like to now open the conversation up to our panelists to see how the practitioners have actually been approaching this idea of resilience. Martin has laid out a very elaborate manner by which we could actually evaluate issues of resilience and the factor that we should keep in mind. Firstly, let me come to you, Deepak. In a sector of auto and auto components, which not only is going through its transformation in terms of the energy transition, you also have to deal with COVID at the same time. Could you talk us through a little bit of your experience, both from a perspective of how you dealt with COVID, from a perspective of business resilience, and how are you viewing it in the future, given a much more disruptive force that's coming into your industry?
Thank you, Nikhil. I think, as you rightly said, the auto sector is going through a transformational change which is never seen probably in about 150 years. And I think as a part of supply chain, I think we have not seen that much disruption based on the supply and demand mismatch, what actually Corona came in. You have to also see in the context of India, because the supply chain and the auto sector was already reeling through probably a kind of negative growth, starting from a peak of 17, 18, went to 18, 19, 19, 20, and then Corona hit in. So already a fragmented, fragile sector, and then basically Corona hit in. And I think the key part here, the learning was that as a supply chain, we were kind of interconnected with a global link. The auto sector, per se, in the supply chain, the components, is just 1.5 or less than 1.5% of the global value chain. But some event happening in China or in Europe actually completely collapsed the supply chain out here. And I think the way we had to look was we had to kind of remodel our business plan. The first and key important point was to collaborate with the customer, because the customer collaboration and communication kind of actually gave us a visibility of how they were expecting the whole change environment coming in. I'll just give an example. Starting in 2020, when Corona hit in, when we started the financial year, April, May, June of 2020, we actually had zero revenue. So it was business continuity at risk. And it was not if, let's say, a Lumax would be able to supply parts to a customer, but it was the whole supply chain getting completely threatened. So hence the whole collaborative nature of work came in, where I think there was immense communications coming from the customer. I think we jointly started to make the safety protocols on actually the workplace, because we are manufacturers. I mean, so we are contributing to almost 50% of the manufacturing GDP of the country. And that basically needed that we needed a safe working environment. We had no experience prior to say, how do we manage, let's say, social distancing on shop floor, because that actually constrains productivity, that constrains capacities, what we are building for. And I think the second thing was that how do we actually also foresee risk? So let's say in the first quarter, we had zero revenue. We were looking at protocols, how do we maintain the shop floor? But we were never anticipating that there would be semiconductor shortages, or there were actually being hyperinflation and commodity prices increase, and there was no this thing. So, you had to actually rethink the complete business model. Mr. Kirloskar, who's chairing the Toyota, he said we actually have learned from him the principles of lean manufacturing. That went out of the window in the Corona world, because we had to overstock, over-inventorize, and actually ensure that we have the finished goods inventory a lot more, because we did not know what would the other risks be. So I think the whole revisitation of a business model, which the auto industry, auto sector had been looking at for decades, learning how to improve, was actually to now look at how do we mitigate risk and how do we actually ensure that there is business continuity. And I think the last point was that I think we kind of realized that we were in a world where we had to adopt digital technology very rapidly. And I think that became more of a dire need in this crisis. We've been always talking about Industry 4.0. How do we actually make our shop floors more digital? But this whole corona gave us an opportunity to actually fast track this adoption. We still started the work from home protocols, the Zooms, but in a manufacturing setup, maybe in an information technology setup, it's probably different, but in a manufacturing setup in India, we've never experienced that. And I think how to adapt and adopt in a fast track when it came to a crisis and need, I think that became. And so I think many factors, and I think what Martin just made in this presentation, I could kind of correlate to it, that the sector and the company made many, many strides. And I think it was multiple dimensions, multiple things which we had to work on. Specifically on collaboration, digitization, and also on how do we actually ensure business continuity.
Thanks, Deepak. That's a very good insight into the auto sector. Maybe if we have time, we could revert and ask about the transition to EVs and how that is going to it's a very clear disruption that's going to take place and how you would deal with resilience in that context. But coming to Shiv, of course, covers strategy and variety of different functions for the Aditya Birla Group, but has held variety of different leadership positions at Nokia and Pepsi as well, and is a management guru in his own right, and someone who I really look up to. Shiv, the Aditya Birla Group is massive, and you have multiple different sectors and multiple different areas of operations and locations. How did you deal with the issue of resilience, and how are you continuing to deal with the structure by which you could implement this on a system-wide basis for all the variety of different industries in which you operate?
Yeah, so I'll keep my remarks more general, Nikhil. Thank you for inviting me. I see resilience as the middle word between two other important words. The first is volatility. The last is agility. Every time you have volatility, you will have to build resilience and have to show resilience. And you can only do that if you're agile. And I would see that as the trimmer weight of the words. Let's now volatility. Volatility has been measured by the CBOE, the Chicago Board of Options Exchange, for the S&P 500 over the last 31 years. If you look at the last 31 years, an index more than 20 is seen as volatile. In the last 31 years, there have been 13 years where the index has been more than 20. Today, the index is 131 as I speak with you right now. I just checked it before I logged in. 131 is the index today. There have been 5 years where the index is really huge, last year being one of them. The previous 4 years where the index was huge was 2000, the dot-com bubble, did not impact India much. 2002, the fraud in Accenture and Exxon did not impact India much. 2008, the global financial crisis impacted India. 2018, the US-China standoff, that benefited India. So of the 5 big volatile years, we've benefited from 2 of them. The way to think of this whole issue of resilience is to think about it in 3 areas. First is policies, second is practices, and the third is people. In terms of policies, I think you need to rethink your policy of how you deal with your whole ecosystem. I think somebody mentioned it. The whole end-to-end system has to be resilient and not just one part of that end-to-end system. So your effective partnerships and everything around the system, you have to possibly provide credit to some of your people. You have to possibly collect faster from some people. So the whole system has to recognize that it needs to become resilient. Second is practices. I think the practices of a company come under severe stress in resilient times. I think most corporations tend to treat the smaller companies shabbily in resilient times. They tend to protect themselves. I think companies which tend to treat their partners well are the ones which actually become more resilient, which actually get better terms as you come out of the crisis. And third, which is the most important element, is people. People, there are 2 elements to people. One is leadership. Whenever you have a crisis, people want hope because they see a vacuum. They're very scared. They're like rabbits in front of a headlight. So the role of leadership is actually to provide hope. You have to do that through constant communication and telling people when do you see the light at the end of the tunnel. Otherwise, people will assume the worst. So resilient is a lot about building the resilience in people and not just systems and policies. This is the most important one in my book. So for example, in one of our businesses, we've done virtual town hall. We have done weekly calls on business updating globally. We've done virtual town halls for the whole organization, communicating with people in simple traffic light terms. This is green, this is red, this is yellow. This is what we're doing to move red to yellow. This is what we're doing to move yellow to green, etc. A constant updation gives people the hope that, okay, this is fine. It is much like if you're in an aircraft and you're going through turbulence, the last thing you want is the pilot to be silent. The best thing you want is the pilot to say, hey, you know what? We have 10 minutes of turbulence, fasten your seatbelt, 11th minute, you're fine. That's exactly what people expect when you go through this situation of volatility. They expect constant communication and constant, where is the light at the end of the tunnel? The other one is dramatic shift of moving from being labor intensive to digitally intensive. Almost every single business has had to rethink its digital business model. In that sense, then you virtually have to start by revamping your website. I cannot tell you if you actually go around and look at the websites, many people haven't changed their websites as a result of the pandemic. That's the first starting step in my book. Change your website, get your customers on, get your influencers on, and really start connecting with people. I think that's very, very important. Okay. Then I would also say that, you really need to rethink your fixed cost structure. I think businesses tend to do better when they try to convert as much of their fixed costs into variable costs as possible. The more fixed costs you have, you just have to lift that weight of the runway, and that becomes more and more difficult. Okay, and hence, I think sweating in good times is a logic I try to provide to people rather than sweating in bad times. So if you're lean and fit and a flat organization, you tend to do much better rather than trying to shed weight when you're actually in a crisis like this. The other one is, I think, in terms of the ability to judge performance in resilient times or in tough times is very, very difficult. So there will be people putting in 110% effort, and sometimes we tend not to notice them. There are people who will come and talk to us all the time, and we think that they are the people who are actually making the difference. So the whole issue of policies and people, I think, becomes even more important when you think about managing a resilient time. That's what I would say to start with.
Thank you very much, Shiv. I definitely am going to check out the CBOE Volatility Index. It's truly fantastic that it's at 130 now. We live in an extremely volatile world.
It's called VIX, Volatility
VIX,
Index.
VIX,
Just type VIX, exactly. You'll get it.
Exactly. There's so many acronyms going on from VUCA to BANI now in terms of how you aim to deal with uncertainty, but resilience is a real matter. And your focus on people being at the center of this is really a very important insight that I think I personally am taking out of this conversation, apart from the other aspects that you talked about. I'd like to come to Mr. Anil Parab, who leads a heavy engineering division for L&T, which is the largest engineering company in India, and also the supply of what I believe is one of the most important industrial installations that we're going to have in this century, which is the Tokamak in France. Mr. Parab, how has L&T and your division led through this time, and what insights do you have in terms of business resilience from both the perspective of dealing with your customers as well as your own business continuity? You're muted right now, Mr. Parab.
Thank you, Mr. Nikhil. In fact, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. See, at L&T, we are primarily a conglomerate. I will talk more on the project business and the customized high-tech manufacturing. That is what we are today's topic, manufacturing. Now, I would say that for us, we could deal with the business disruption and come out with a good resilience, primarily because of four things. See, the people who actually work for us, engineers, workmen, we took good care of them because they themselves were going through a sort of stress because of the pandemic. There was a lot of uncertainty. So that's the first part. We said we need to support them. The second part is the cultural transformation. In fact, Mr. Baba Kalyani talked about it. Because when you talk about the technology, you can buy many things, but at the end of it, if you do not establish the cultural maturity for the organization, you will not be successful. So change from analog to digital, you have to use artificial intelligence, IIoT, machine learning. If your mindset has not changed, no matter what you do, you're not going to succeed. So that's the second part, what we did. The third part is the customer confidence, because see, the 60% of the business what I had is international, and India was perceived as a country risk, being a most populous country. So to restore the confidence, so the first part was the communication and the transparency. So actually we had a lot of digital platforms within the company like MS Team, Zoom, but nobody was using because the cultural maturity was not there. So this became like your most essential thing. In fact, I would say that between May 20 to almost mid-July 2020, I could have almost 130 MS Team meetings with our customers across the globe. And if you really think of it, in the traditional, conventional way, you can never imagine that in 2.5 months you can have so many meetings. So that's the first change. We also did a lot of virtual walkthroughs of our factory because the entire factory is now Wi-Fi enabled, digitally enabled. So the way work was going on, all social distancing norms are being followed, staggering of the shift, sanitization. This was showed, webcasted live to the customers so that they see it. And in fact, they could see that the things are happening. And even in the pandemic, when the first lockdown was there, obviously the government was very supportive. They allowed manufacturing to go on. The next part was the supply chain. In fact, when you talk about the supply chain, if you really see, there were different part of the world was facing different stage of the pandemic. Somewhere it was opened out, somewhere it was locked down. The country like China was following zero infection policy. So actually this was causing a lot of disruption. So building strong relationship with the supplier base, because our supply chain is spread across the globe. Parallelly try to develop the supply chain within the country, because you can't do it overnight. But to have the security for future, this was another important aspect. So I would say that it was a mix of all of this, and the combination of this finally culminates into reliability selling. Because if you are not delivering on time the right quality products, no matter what you do, the customers are not going to support you. So this is one thing, because I think one speaker talked of force majeure. Now, in fact, the customers are telling us you are entering into a contract knowing well pandemic. So you need to factor it. So they really can't consider the force majeure for pandemic. Actually, if you have to deliver reliable on time, then you need to build a strong resilience within, because otherwise you will not be able to do it. So I would say that it's extremely important to leverage the digital technology. In fact, we saw this as an opportunity, what Mr. Martin talked. We intensified our investment in digital technology during this time. We had started in 2017, but we accelerated during the pandemic. And that is what has really helped us to survive this business disruption. I'll stop here and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parab. I'd like to come to Professor Chris White now. Thank you firstly for joining us so early in the morning. Professor White has had a very lauded past in public life as well, but in this current role that you have as the Director of Policy and Industrial Foresight, could you give us an indication as to where the global position sits on resilience, and specifically for the Indian context, would you have any insights that we could gain from your experience?
Thank you, Nicole, and it's fine. I'm more than happy to have an early start once a week. I do have I have had a number of roles. One being at the director of a policy unit in a university, but also being on the executive of the Manufacturing Technology Centre, and also as a member of Parliament. So I think what Shiv said earlier about the importance of people and policies in resilience is something that we need to take on board. It is not all about manufacturing systems. In the UK, we're very much in a post-COVID, post-Brexit, and a net zero world, and certainly two of those are very much global issues. One of the things, or a couple of things that Martin said in his presentation were very interesting about resilience not being about crisis, more about opportunity, being able to anticipate shocks and shape and not become a victim. I do think in, not least in the UK's terms, we were not prepared for the shocks that were brought by COVID. And I think that the world similarly, I mean, we can look back in retrospect and say the things that we have learned definitely were very, very important, very interesting to how we manufacture and our production in the future. We did a survey or a study during the first lockdown called the Midlands Manufacturing Resilience Commission. It was very much based on the fact that we understood that we were not prepared in terms of PPE, and some of the lessons we learned in terms of producing ventilators, some of the lessons we learned in terms of approving drugs, and how the speed of these things had to change. I think a number of your speakers have recognized some of the challenges and some of the lessons, but I certainly think that resilience, the resilience of our supply chains, the resilience of our production, the understanding of collaboration have become much more important. And I think the word leadership is something that bridges a lot of the solutions to some of our problems. We recognized that there is a slow adoption of some of the technologies that we need on a global level. Things like automation, the understanding of collaboration, the need to understand where the skills should be. We need to be far more agile, and we can only be agile if we are prepared to upskill and reskill some of our workforce. I know one of the questions that Downing Street asks is, what do you say to the 40-year-old truck driver? And this is an issue that is also very global. How prepared are we for the technologies of the future, not least in terms of things like automation? What does that mean for net zero? What does that mean for planning? What does that mean for the way we find our future of work? I think we need to focus on better adoption, faster adoption, and making sure that the technologies of things like artificial intelligence and AI are understood much better through the supply chain. Don't even mean the supply chain in industry, the supply chain of manufacture, but through our education system, which I think we lack so much in terms of what we want to achieve through our young people and their futures. We are very much part of our agenda is a global Britain, and I think understanding what things like scientific superpowers mean. What they mean to me is collaboration with other economies, not least where we have strong relationships such as with India, but also across the world. We need to learn more about your techniques, your solutions, how you are, exemplar in adopting new technologies, adopting new software, new techniques of working. And I think when we better understand the opportunities that some of these technologies will bring, not Certainly in artificial intelligence and automation, we're always very concerned that they're going to remove jobs. I think there's a process of education to say that with automation, new jobs can bring in. I think finally, this disruptive technologies and being a member of parliament, or having been a member of parliament, it is very difficult to legislate for disruptive technologies in terms of the Ubers of this world and the Airbnbs of this world. I think we need to learn how to adopt, learn, and implement and welcome these technologies, because at the end of the day, this is how we will be living our lives. There are many opportunities for manufacturers across the globe to adopt some of these techniques. And I think we should be more willing, prepared, and understanding of how we can bring them into our ecosystem. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor White. I think we will have time to come back again to all our panelists for some questions. But to our last panelist, Mr. Amrit Acharya. Amrit, digitization has been used several times by every speaker in terms of some of the modes by which companies have tried to cater to the risks that they have faced. You are a digital company who aims to bridge this through marketplaces and a variety of different business models. Can you tell us how you have seen the issue of resilience with your customers and clients, and what is the insight that you may have for all the guests today?
No, thanks a lot, Nikhil, for having me. I'll maybe take a minute to introduce our company. I think we are not as well known compared to some of the other ones, and then I'll talk about what you just said. Fundamentally, what we do is we work with customers who want to get products made. We partner with these companies at the design phase, and we make sure that these products are ultimately made as per spec. But we largely do it through asset-light marketplace model, as you mentioned. So we tap into the existing SME network, largely focused on India. And we feel that there's a lot of depth to manufacturing in India. And we provide a digital platform, so to speak, where these SMEs can showcase their credentials, their capabilities, and then ultimately lead to fulfilling the orders that customers have. And we are present across many supply chains, beginning with industrial ones like oil and gas, aerospace, infrastructure, to consumer ones like retail, apparel, etc. I think the number one thing that we saw, so we are a very digital first company. So, in fact, in the last 24 months since COVID started, I think we have been work from home for maybe 18 or 19 of those months. In fact, we have work from home right now. So I'm at my parents' place in Bhubaneswar, where I grew up. And for us, it was a very easy switch to make in terms of aligning the entire org. That okay, suddenly we are in changing the way we operate, and some of the things that the other panelists mentioned have been very helpful for us in terms of over communicating as a company, in terms of using. We were anyway fairly digitally native when we started our journey, but just doubling down on some of these technologies, etc. But there are 2-3 things specifically which we did, which we found helpful. Number one was in a time of volatility, I think there was a period of time when actually nobody knew what the next few months are going to look like, and everybody was looking at experts, at leaders for answers. But reality is there was no real consensus on what is the right way forward, and we started looking inwards into the company. I think what is the data that is coming out of the company in terms of segments that are doing well, segments that are not doing well. What are customers saying, and what are our people saying who are closer to the business sometimes than even leadership is. And we doubled down on that. So we moved from being a very top-down company in terms of how decision making is made to very bottom-up, like where decentralization of decision making took place in a massive way across the organization. Now, there were certain risks attached to that as well, but it helped us become extremely agile. So when market shifts were happening around us, we were very quick to notice them, and at least on whether this is a crisis or an opportunity. Give an example of this. Like before we entered COVID, our business was 100% focused on the domestic India market, but today almost 20% of our revenues come from the US. Now this is a shift which happened in 1 year, and from 0% to 20%, while the company itself grew a lot. And we don't have any employees in the US. We have maybe 5 people there. So this entire entire aspect of onboarding customers digitally from India, of course, in a very volatile environment, was something which, again, none of us really knew the answer going in, but we picked up these signals from the company and from the market at large that this is the right thing to do at this point in time. The second thing which we did was, again, like looking at our business overall and focus on diversification as a theme. So, what are cycles that we are over indexed to, what are cycles we are under indexed to, and hence how can we strike the right balance between playing on market trends that are important, at the same time keeping a slight bit of a healthy distance and de-attachment to any specific industry or opportunity. And the last thing I'll say on this is, and I think people mentioned the role of technology. As I said, we are very technology first. So when we entered into this cycle, I think we started positioning the company very differently also. Before COVID, like a lot of customers perceived us as a very, maybe a good to have. But suddenly it became a very must have in terms of digital selection of supply, digital monitoring of projects as they're going through that manufacturing journey. And the way we presented ourselves to customers that we work with, that look, the world is changing, and here is one way, which is us. Of course, you have many other options. Here is one way where you can at least participate in this change in a way that is minimally disruptive to your business. So that helps a lot again. And we are as we are entering 2022, shifting our minds from this topic of resilience actually to how do we simplify the business that we have created over the last year or two.
Firstly, many congratulations, Amrit, on your success. We have some time, ladies and gentlemen, so I'd like to just go back to the beginning, start with Martin, and just get a quick few remarks before we close the session. So from Martin all the way back to Amrit again. Martin, in your conversation around prudence, you talked about risks which may happen in the long term and are visibly there. People have talked about white swans and black swans and all of these different swans that exist in terms of evaluation of risk. But something that in my opinion is a very key risk, and as we move to this digitized field and a way of digitized working, is cyber and cyber threats and cyber security. There comes an issue of capacity and capability to be able to assess and manage those risks. How do you from a framework perspective look at capacity and capability in just a simple context of cyber? And maybe I could just run that through all the people as we try to close this session.
Well, you don't try to forecast because these things are unforecastable, but I think there's a number of things you can do. I think, and this may sound a little strange, but resilience has to occur in the mind too. So in other words, we must entertain different mental models of the things that might change the world. And the best way to do that actually is with games. So I've been working on developing 16 executive games that are designed to make explicit and stretch the assumptions. I call them pre-strategy games because you can't really think objectively about something unless you first stretch your mind. And another advantage of these games, the mental preparation, is that if from a purely logical point of view, you try to create scenarios with 7 variables and 7 factorial combinations, there are just too many scenarios. So you can't prepare for everything. Well, how do you know what you need to prepare for? Well, you can look at where disruption will logically occur. And so let me give you quickly 2 ways of looking at that. One of them is what I call the Maverick game. The Maverick game says, who are the companies on the edge of your industry that are taking a bet against your business model? That's a disruption risk. And you can ask the question, and where is the smart money being focused in investment in those companies? And then you can ask, what would be the consequences if that company had the right bet on the future? And then you can ask yourself, how would we future-proof ourselves against that threat? So that's not random threats, that's competitive, potential business model competition from sources that already exist. The second example would be what I call the friction game. Every business has friction. You know, a perfect business, in a perfect business, the customers understand your product, there's no quality problems, there's no misunderstandings, there's no intermediation costs, but real businesses have friction. If you map the frictions in your business, then you find the places where it would be logical at some point in the future for a disruptor to disrupt your business. So there's sort of vulnerabilities. So again, that's not a random array of possibilities. That's sort of where it would be logical for a disruptor to disrupt. So these are some of the ways, and then there's a list of behavioral interventions that I already mentioned, which is, for instance, behavioral preparation through wargaming different scenarios. Because many times I've seen companies that, you know, had very good risk management, very good scenario games, and so they actually knew what was going to happen. And there's no better example than that of Kodak, which not only invented the digital camera, but actually had a very good plan as to logically what they should do about the digital camera. But behaviorally, they were unable to do it. So I think the behavioral tests are as important as the sort of analytical side of all of this.
Thank you, Martin. Deepak, you have a disruption which is, well, everyone knows what's happening in your industry. So very quickly, if you could just keep it to a minute or so, what are some of the actions that you're taking to cater to that?
So I think the whole transformation on the electric and the case, all right, the mobility is transformation changing. I think as a supplier, component supplier, I think first and foremost is that are the current products EV agnostic or not? Are they EV proof or not? And I think that's very, very critical. And in that, you'll also find that a lot of the products would actually be having a huge, massive technology shift trending, because it's not just EV, but there are trends in automotive sector like lightweighting, like electronification, like sensorization. And are the companies capable of actually delivering that to the customer need? I think we've been doing a lot of collaborative approach. I think we're great as supply chains to make products to the customer specs. But I think a lot of data management is coming in. And I think in India, that's an opportunity clearly where the component industry need to collaborate with various other players in the ecosystem, like the software players, like the startups, so that we are more agile to actually try and co-create something which actually transforms the mobility. And you have to also understand, Nikhil, that India, you know, we talk about case, which is connected, you know, adaptive. I mean, say you're talking safe, you're talking electric. But I think in India, A stands for affordable. And I think that's the innovation opportunity which India market provides. You have the largest two-wheeler market, which is going to be very, very fastly transitioning to the electric. Hopefully in the passenger cars, you would have different areas of mobility, including hybrid, electric, I mean, say, alternate fuels. And I think that gives opportunities for all supply chain partners to kind of participate in that. But you have to be very clear with the limited resources and what kind of investment risk you're having and risk appetite, that where do you want to play the game in? And I think that's where your strategy would lie. So I would just like to close with that.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Shiv, I'm going to come to you to close up this session for us. I'm just going to come to Mr. Parab first. Mr. Parab, what are some of the aspects that you're looking at in the future? And again, if I could request you to keep it to about a minute or so. You're muted, Mr. Parab.
Reskilling is one of the things which we are doing in a big way, because with all these IIoT stations, the smart workstations, there used to be a time when two workmen used to work together. Today, one workman is manning 3 stations. So it's a change of mind shift. And they need to use this technology, because that also needs a skilling. This is one part what we are doing for the future. Second part, a lot of data is generated through the digital technology application. Moving it to the next level of data analytics to improve your competitive advantage. That's the second thing what we will do for future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Parab. Professor White, how can we see a greater collaboration between India and the United Kingdom? You talked about it a little bit in terms of Britain having manufacturing competence and trying to build an ecosystem within countries? Or is there anything else that you think that we should be focusing on as we look forward?
I think one of your panelists has mentioned for example, the whole business of electric vehicles. We need to, if we're going to get to where we want to in terms of net zero, our supply chains need to change dramatically in terms of producing rotors instead of pistons and all the other things that go into an internal combustion engine. I think that is a very strategic approach that we will need global supply chains to support that shift. If in 10 years' time, all our vehicles are going to be electric, there's not going to be an internal combustion engine on the road, we will need to have support and vice versa between countries like India and ourselves.
Thank you, Professor White. Amrit, I see that you have a little bit of problem, but if you're with us, could I request you to give us some of the insights as to what you are going to be focusing on at ZWork in the next 6 months, 1 year?
Yeah, my internet is a little choppy, but the key focus for us is international. I think this year, it helps us build resiliency as well from the markets we operate in today to the markets we can operate in the future. And other than that, the idea is we're a growing company, so we need to build the right systems and processes within to make sure that as the business enters into a scale, then the SLAs and service levels that we used to offer our customers stay the same. So that's our main area of focus this year.
Thank you, Amrit. Lastly, to you, Shiv, what are the areas that you wish to focus on going forward? You laid out a paradigm of policy, practice, and people.
Yeah, I would say that I think in resilient times and into the future, I mentioned agility is going to be absolutely critical. Is going to be absolutely critical. How does agility come through in an organization? Agility does not come in a vertical hierarchy. All organizations are organized vertically. The first organization to have an organization structure was the New York and Erie Railroad in 1853. And that was built vertically. And we've continued that. Digital is a horizontal capability. It runs across every single function. So the real way to get agility is to ensure that people are transferring work and completed work horizontally and not reporting vertically. So till organizations start thinking about agility as a horizontal activity and not a vertical activity, things will not change.
Thank you very much, Shiv. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to an end to this session. I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us here. We've had a very fruitful discussion, and I'm sure the Secretariat will put together certain minutes and learnings from this session and circulate them around so that we could benefit from those in the future. Again, thank you very much. Please do stay on for the minister who will be joining us shortly.
Nikhil, Satish, I just want to make a small announcement. First of all, we'd like to thank you for chairing and moderating this session on behalf of all members and also the panelists. I also wanted to especially thank Mr. Martin, who has joined us at a very late hour from US. Thank you very much for that. And also Chris for joining us very early. I wanted to just say that the minister session, which will be part of the inaugural session, will happen in a different link. So I would request you to log out and log in on the other link, and we look forward to your participation at the inaugural session of the summit. The other two sessions, which is following the inaugural, will be using the same link. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you all of you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Good day.